April 14, 1943, off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. At 0430 hours, as the USS Buckley cut through the dark Atlantic waters under a clouded sky, Petty Officer William Harmon stared intently at the radar screen that showed absolutely nothing within a 50-mile radius. Intelligence reports had indicated German U-boat activity in these waters, yet the most advanced radar equipment the American Navy possessed could not detect a trace of enemy presence. What Harmon didn't know as he sipped his lukewarm coffee was that his life's work would soon change the course of the war in the Atlantic. The technological limits he had spent months questioning privately were about to be shattered by the most unlikely of naval heroes. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how one man's understanding of radio frequencies would expose the deadly shadow war beneath the Atlantic waves, revealing a truth that Naval Command had refused to acknowledge. Their detection systems were fundamentally flawed against the evolving German submarine technology. The Atlantic War was reaching its bloody crescendo in early 1943. U-boats were cutting deep, deadly swaths through Allied shipping. Over 1 million tons of supplies and war materials had been sent to the bottom of the ocean in the first 3 months of that year alone. The Germans called it the Second Happy Time, a macabre celebration of success in their unrestricted submarine warfare campaign. For the Allied forces, particularly the Americans still reeling from losses at Pearl Harbor, it was a desperate time of reckoning. Lieutenant Commander James Blackwell of the U.S. Navy's Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit stood in the war room of the Charleston Naval Base, scanning the large tactical map spread before him. Red pins dotted the blue expanse, each one representing a confirmed Allied ship sunk by German U-boats. There were far too many red pins. "These new U-boat tactics are killing us, gentlemen," Blackwell said, addressing the gathered officers and technical staff. "They're surfacing at night, using the darkness for cover, and our current radar systems simply aren't detecting them when they're running on the surface. The question is, why?" The room fell silent. Among those present was Calvin Jackson, a 28-year-old radar technician who had joined the Navy under the limited opportunities available to African Americans at the time. Prior to the war, Jackson had worked as an electrical engineer for a radio manufacturing company in Chicago, one of the few such positions open to a black man with his qualifications. He had 3 university degrees in electrical engineering, physics, and mathematics, earned through night school while working days at his father's radio repair shop. "Permission to speak, sir," Jackson said, raising his hand slightly. Commander Blackwell nodded, though some of the other officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It was unusual for a technician, especially a Negro technician, to speak up in such a meeting. "I've been studying the performance reports from our radar units," Jackson continued. "I believe there's a fundamental flaw in how we're scanning for submarines. The current system is designed primarily for detecting surface ships and aircraft, operating on frequencies that aren't optimized for the unique radar cross-section of a partially submerged U-boat." "Go on," Blackwell said, his interest piqued. "Sir, I believe we need to modify the equipment to scan on alternate frequencies. The German submarines have a distinctive conning tower design that, when only partially exposed above the waterline, creates a particular radar signature that our current systems might be missing." Captain Wallace Ritter, a senior officer with decades of naval experience but little technical knowledge, scoffed audibly. "You're suggesting that German submarines are invisible to our radar? That's preposterous. The problem is with the operators, not the equipment." Jackson stood his ground. "Not invisible, sir, just returning signals that fall outside our current detection parameters. It's like tuning a radio to the wrong station. The broadcast is there, but you're not hearing it." Commander Blackwell studied Jackson carefully. "You have experience with radar systems, Technician Jackson?" "Yes, sir. Before enlisting, I worked for Zenith Radio Corporation, designing receiver components, and I've spent every free moment studying our naval radar systems since my assignment here." "Very well. Put your theories in writing. I want a full report on my desk by 0800 tomorrow," Blackwell ordered. "Thank you, sir," Jackson replied, ignoring the dismissive looks from some of the white officers in the room. As the meeting dispersed, Lieutenant Marcus Wells, a young radar officer who had been watching the exchange with interest, approached Jackson. "That was quite a performance," Wells said, falling into step beside Jackson as they walked down the corridor. "Just stating the facts, sir," Jackson replied cautiously, unsure of Wells' intent. "I've noticed some of the same anomalies in our detection patterns," Wells admitted, "but I couldn't quite put my finger on what was causing them. Your theory about frequency optimization makes sense." Jackson looked at Wells with surprise. "You've seen it too?" "I've been on the USS Buckley for 6 months. There have been at least 3 occasions when sonar detected U-boats that radar completely missed. If what you're saying is true, it could explain the discrepancy." "The Buckley has the new SG surface search radar, doesn't it?" Jackson asked. "Yes, supposedly state-of-the-art," Wells confirmed. "I'd like to see the performance logs if possible." Wells hesitated. "That's classified information, Technician Jackson. I understand, sir, but if I'm going to prepare a comprehensive report for Commander Blackwell—" Wells nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do. Meet me in the radar lab at 2000 hours. We'll have some privacy then." Later that evening, in the dimly lit radar laboratory, Jackson pored over the logs Wells had provided. Page after page of radar contacts, and more tellingly, the absence of contacts when sonar had indicated submarine presence. "Look at this pattern," Jackson said, spreading several logs side by side. "Every time a U-boat was detected by sonar but missed by radar, it was during low-light conditions with slight sea chop. The submarines must be running with minimal surface exposure, which means a smaller radar cross-section," Wells added, beginning to see the pattern. "Exactly. And our radar is optimized for larger targets. We need to modify the receiver to be more sensitive to smaller returns and adjust the pulse timing to better distinguish between wave clutter and actual targets." Wells looked skeptical. "Can that be done without completely rebuilding the system? We can't exactly take radar sets offline for major overhauls in the middle of a shipping crisis." Jackson smiled for the first time. "That's the beauty of it, Lieutenant. I think we can make the modifications with minimal disruption, primarily adjusting the filter circuits and recalibrating the signal processors. The basic hardware remains unchanged." "If you're right, this could be a game changer," Wells said, excitement building in his voice. "I'll need access to a radar unit to test my modifications." Wells frowned. "That's asking a lot, Jackson. These are million-dollar pieces of equipment." "I understand the risk, sir, but the potential reward is finding U-boats that are currently slipping through our fingers. How many ships and lives would that save?" The lieutenant was quiet for a long moment. "I can get you access to one of the training units. It's the older SC model, not the SG that's currently deployed, but the basic principles are the same." "That would be enough to prove the concept," Jackson nodded eagerly. "I'll arrange it, but Jackson," Wells locked eyes with him, "this stays between us until we have results. If you're wrong, or if something gets damaged, we'll both be in serious trouble." "Understood, sir. Thank you for taking the chance." For the next 3 nights, Jackson worked tirelessly in the radar lab while Wells kept curious eyes away. The modifications were delicate, requiring both technical knowledge and a steady hand. Jackson carefully adjusted the receiver's filter circuits, modified the signal processing algorithms, and recalibrated the display parameters to highlight smaller returns that the standard system would have filtered out as sea clutter. On the 4th night, Wells arrived to find Jackson slumped over his workbench, fast asleep. The modified radar unit sat ready for testing. "Jackson," Wells said, gently shaking the technician awake, "is it ready?" Jackson startled, then quickly composed himself. "Yes, sir, sorry for the unprofessional display. When was the last time you slept properly?" "I'm not sure, sir. The work required continuous attention." Wells shook his head. "Well, it had better be worth it. I've arranged for a test tomorrow morning. The Buckley is conducting training exercises in the bay, and Commander Blackwell has authorized us to bring our experimental modifications aboard for testing." Jackson's eyes widened. "The commander approved this?" "Not exactly," Wells admitted. "I told him we were testing some minor calibration adjustments that might improve performance in rough seas. He doesn't know the full extent of what we've done." "I see," Jackson said nervously. "Well, I stand by my work, sir. The modifications will perform as expected. They'd better, Wells replied grimly, because I've just put my career on the line alongside yours. The following morning, Jackson and Wells boarded the USS Buckley with their modified radar unit secured in a heavy equipment case. The destroyer was a hive of activity as it prepared to depart for its training exercise. Few paid attention to the two men carefully transporting their precious cargo to the radar room. The ship's radar technician, Petty Officer First Class Thomas Reynolds, was less than thrilled about the intrusion into his domain. "With all due respect, Lieutenant," Reynolds said stiffly, "I don't see why we need to install experimental equipment during an operational exercise. Orders from Commander Blackwell," Wells replied smoothly. "This is Technician Jackson. He'll be installing and monitoring the modified components." Reynolds barely acknowledged Jackson, his disdain evident. "Fine, but I'll be monitoring everything he does. This is still my radar system." "Of course," Jackson said politely. "I appreciate your assistance, Petty Officer Reynolds." The installation took just under an hour, with Reynolds watching Jackson's every move like a hawk. When it was complete, the radar appeared unchanged to casual observation, but Jackson knew that its detection capabilities had been fundamentally transformed. "All right, let's power it up," Jackson said, his hand hovering over the switch. "Wait," Reynolds interjected. "We need to run pre-operation diagnostics first." "The standard diagnostics won't register these modifications correctly," Jackson explained. "They're designed for the original configuration." "So your modifications will fail diagnostics." "That doesn't inspire confidence," Reynolds said sarcastically. Wells stepped in. "We're testing new parameters, Reynolds. By definition, they won't match standard expectations. Power it up as Technician Jackson suggests." Reluctantly, Reynolds stood aside as Jackson activated the system. The radar screen flickered to life, displaying what initially appeared to be a normal sweep pattern. But as Jackson adjusted several calibration dials, the display changed subtly. There was more detail in the sea return, more definition in the wave patterns. "It's showing too much clutter," Reynolds complained. "You'll never distinguish actual contacts from all that noise." "Just wait," Jackson said confidently, making one final adjustment. As the three men watched, the radar completed another sweep. This time something new appeared, a small, distinct return about 12 miles from their position. "What's that?" Wells asked, pointing to the blip. Reynolds checked his charts. "There shouldn't be anything there. Probably just a false return from your overactive system." "Or it's something that the standard system would have missed entirely," Jackson countered. "Can we investigate the contact?" Wells left to speak with the bridge, while Jackson and Reynolds continued to monitor the mysterious return. It remained consistent, sweep after sweep, exactly where a vessel might be if it were trying to observe the Buckley's training exercise undetected. When Wells returned, his expression was grim. "The captain agrees it's worth investigating, especially given the recent U-boat activity in the area. He's altering course to approach the contact. Battle stations will be called in 5 minutes." "You think it's actually a submarine?" Reynolds asked, his skepticism fading. "We'll find out soon enough," Jackson replied, his eyes never leaving the radar display. The USS Buckley changed course, its engines pushing the destroyer through the waves at increasing speed. As they closed distance with the unknown contact, Jackson fine-tuned his modified radar, enhancing the return signature. "The contact is moving," he announced. "Slow speed, heading east, away from us." "Trying to avoid detection," Wells surmised. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "General quarters, general quarters. All hands man your battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The radar room erupted into activity as additional personnel arrived. Jackson found himself pushed to the background as the regular crew took their stations. Only Wells ensured he remained near the modified radar unit. "Sonar reports possible submarine contact, same bearing as radar," one of the new arrivals announced. Jackson and Wells exchanged a significant look. The modified radar was detecting what the sonar was only now confirming. On the bridge, Captain Harold Morrison studied the reports with intensity. "How certain are we this is a submarine?" "Sonar is now reporting definite submarine characteristics, Captain," the sonar officer replied. "And radar is tracking a small surface contact consistent with a partially exposed conning tower. Morrison turned to Commander Blackwell, who had joined them on the bridge. "Your experimental radar modifications seem to be paying dividends, Commander." "So it appears," Blackwell replied, though he looked somewhat confused by the captain's comment. The Buckley continued its pursuit, closing the distance to the contact. At 6,000 yards, the captain ordered depth charges readied. Below in the radar room, Jackson continued to track the contact. "They're diving, sir," he reported to Wells. "The radar signature is diminishing." "Sonar confirms the target is descending," another technician called out. "Depth now estimated at 60 feet and increasing." Captain Morrison made his decision. "Commence attack run, drop pattern Alpha." The Buckley accelerated to attack speed, racing toward the last known position of the submarine. When they reached the designated point, the depth charges were released, plunging into the ocean with ominous splashes. Seconds later, the explosions began, deep, thunderous booms that shook the entire ship. Water erupted in massive columns around them as the charges detonated at their preset depths. "Sonar report," Morrison ordered. "Breaking up noises, Captain. Metal stress and internal explosions. We've hit her." A cheer went up throughout the ship. They had successfully detected and attacked a German U-boat, one that might have remained undetected without Jackson's radar modifications. In the radar room, Reynolds looked at Jackson with newfound respect. "Your modifications made the difference, didn't they?" "The radar only provides the information," Jackson replied modestly. "It took the entire crew to act on it." The Buckley remained in the area for several hours, collecting debris that confirmed the destruction of U-521, a Type 1C U-boat that had been responsible for sinking 3 Allied merchant vessels in the previous month. Upon their return to Charleston, Jackson found himself summoned to Commander Blackwell's office. To his surprise, Captain Morrison and Admiral Wilson Hayes were also present. "Technician Jackson," Blackwell began, "Captain Morrison has given me a full report on today's events. It seems your radar modifications were instrumental in detecting and destroying a German U-boat." "Thank you, sir," Jackson replied, standing at attention. "What I'd like to know," the commander continued, "is why these modifications were implemented without proper authorization. Lieutenant Wells informed me you were making minor calibration adjustments, not fundamentally altering the radar's detection parameters." Jackson swallowed hard, unsure how to respond without implicating Wells. Admiral Hayes stepped forward. "At ease, Technician Jackson. You're not in trouble." "Quite the contrary." "Sir?" Jackson said, confused. "The destruction of U-521 has confirmed what some of us have suspected for some time, that our current radar systems have significant blind spots when it comes to detecting modern U-boats. Your initiative, while unconventional, has provided valuable proof of concept." Captain Morrison nodded in agreement. "The Navy needs this technology deployed throughout the fleet as quickly as possible. Every day we delay means more ships sunk and more lives lost." "Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting," Blackwell said. "We want you to head up a special project team to implement your modifications across all naval radar systems, starting with the Atlantic convoy escort groups." Jackson was stunned. "Me, sir, head up a project team? Is there a problem with that?" Admiral Hayes asked. "No, sir, I'm just, surprised. I'm only a technician and—" He hesitated. "There might be those who object to taking orders from someone like me." The Admiral's eyes narrowed slightly. "By someone like you, I assume you're referring to your race, Technician Jackson?" "Yes, sir." "Let me be perfectly clear," Hayes said firmly. "We are fighting a war against an enemy who would destroy everything we stand for. I don't give a damn about the color of your skin. I care about your ability to help us win this war. Anyone who objects can take it up with me personally." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Hayes said with a grim smile. "You're about to face the Navy bureaucracy, which can be a far more formidable opponent than any U-boat. You'll have Commander Blackwell's full support, and I'll cut through as much red tape as I can. But make no mistake, this won't be easy." "I understand, sir. When do I begin?" "Immediately. We're setting up a workshop at the Naval Research Facility. You'll have a team of 10 technicians and engineers at your disposal. Your first task is to document your modifications in detail and develop a standardized implementation procedure. And Jackson, Blackwell added, Lieutenant Wells will be assigned as your project liaison. His creative interpretation of my orders notwithstanding, he's proven his value in this matter. Thank you, sir. I look forward to continuing our work together. As Jackson left the meeting, his mind was racing. From a technician working in the shadows to heading a special project that could change the course of the Atlantic War, it was almost too much to comprehend. And yet, he knew that the real challenges were only beginning. The next morning, Jackson arrived at the Naval Research Facility to find it abuzz with activity. A dedicated workshop had been set up overnight, with workbenches, testing equipment, and several radar units in various states of disassembly. Lieutenant Wells was already there, along with a team of technicians who looked up with curious expressions as Jackson entered. Some showed obvious surprise at seeing a black man in what appeared to be a position of authority. "Attention on deck," Wells called, and the technicians snapped to attention. "At ease, gentlemen," Jackson said, feeling somewhat awkward in this new role. "I'm Calvin Jackson. As Lieutenant Wells may have informed you, we're working on critical modifications to our radar detection systems that will help us locate German U-boats more effectively." A tall, red-headed technician near the front spoke up. "Lieutenant Wells said you're the one who created these modifications, that you detected a U-boat that nobody else could see." "It was a team effort," Jackson replied diplomatically. "But yes, I developed the initial modifications that improved detection of low-profile surface targets, like surface submarines." "How did you figure it out?" another technician asked. Jackson moved to a blackboard and picked up a piece of chalk. "It started with understanding the fundamental limitations of our current systems," he began, sketching a diagram of a radar wave interacting with a submarine's conning tower. "The standard radar frequencies and return filters are optimized for larger targets like ships and aircraft." For the next hour, Jackson explained the technical principles behind his modifications. As he spoke, he could see the initial skepticism in the men's faces giving way to professional interest and respect. These were technicians and engineers. They understood and appreciated elegant technical solutions, regardless of who presented them. By the end of his explanation, the team was fully engaged, asking insightful questions and offering their own ideas for implementation. Jackson felt a growing confidence. This might actually work. "Our first priority is standardizing these modifications for the SG radar system that's currently deployed on most escort vessels," Jackson concluded. "I want to break into 3 teams, one to document the specific hardware changes, one to develop the installation procedure, and one to create a calibration protocol for operators." "What about testing?" asked Chief Petty Officer Harold Dietz, the most senior technician in the group. "Good point," Jackson acknowledged. "We'll need a 4th team focused on validation testing. Chief Dietz, would you lead that effort?" The chief looked surprised but nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll make sure these modifications work as advertised before they go anywhere near an operational vessel." "Excellent. Lieutenant Wells will coordinate with Naval Command for resources and approvals. We have authorization to requisition whatever equipment and materials we need. Admiral Hayes has made it clear this project is top priority." As the teams began to organize themselves, Wells pulled Jackson aside. "You handled that well. They respect you." "For now," Jackson said quietly. "The real test will come when we move beyond this room and start implementing these changes throughout the fleet." "One step at a time," Wells advised. "Focus on making the technology irrefutable and the rest will follow." Over the next 3 weeks, Jackson and his team worked around the clock to refine the radar modifications. What had begun as Jackson's improvised adjustments evolved into a comprehensive upgrade package with detailed documentation, standardized components, and a rigorous testing protocol. Chief Dietz proved to be an invaluable ally, his decades of technical experience complementing Jackson's theoretical knowledge. Together, they developed a version of the modifications that was not only more effective than Jackson's original design, but also easier to implement in the field. "We've reduced the installation time to under 3 hours, Dietz reported during one of their daily briefings. "Any competent radar technician should be able to perform the upgrade with minimal supervision." "That's crucial." Jackson nodded. We need to roll this out to dozens of vessels as quickly as possible. Commander Blackwell, who had been monitoring their progress, was impressed. Admiral Hayes wants a demonstration for the Atlantic Fleet Command Staff. How soon can you be ready? Jackson looked at Wells and Dietz, who both nodded confidently. We can be ready in 2 days, sir. Make it 1, Blackwell replied. Intelligence reports indicate increased U-boat activity along the convoy routes. Every day counts. The demonstration was held aboard the USS Benson, a destroyer docked at Charleston for repairs. The audience included Admiral Hayes, 4 other flag officers, and a collection of senior naval commanders responsible for Atlantic convoy protection. Jackson stood nervously beside a standard SG radar unit that had been modified according to his team's specifications. Lieutenant Wells and Chief Dietz flanked him, offering silent support. Admiral Hayes addressed the assembled officers. Gentlemen, I've asked you here to witness a technological development that may significantly impact our anti-submarine warfare capabilities. Technician Jackson will explain. Taking a deep breath, Jackson stepped forward. Good morning, sirs. What you're looking at is a standard SG surface search radar that has been modified to detect smaller, low-profile targets that would normally be filtered out as sea clutter. Specifically, it can identify the minimal radar cross-section of a surfaced or partially surfaced submarine at ranges up to 20% greater than unmodified systems. He activated the radar, which displayed a simulated scenario on its screen. This is a standard radar return from a Type 7C U-boat running on the surface at night. As you can see, the unmodified system barely registers the contact, and it could easily be mistaken for wave action. Jackson flipped a switch, and the display changed dramatically. The submarine contact became distinctly visible against the background clutter. With our modifications, the same submarine presents a clear, unmistakable signature that can be easily distinguished from environmental returns. A skeptical captain from the front row spoke up. Impressive demonstration, but how do we know this will work in actual combat conditions? Simulations can be manipulated. A fair question, sir, Jackson acknowledged, which is why we've arranged a practical demonstration. With Admiral Hayes's permission, we've positioned a target vessel in the harbor that approximates the radar cross-section of a surfaced U-boat. It's currently moving on a predetermined course unknown to us. Hayes nodded. Proceed, Technician Jackson. Jackson activated the radar in standard configuration and began a methodical sweep of the harbor. After several minutes, he looked up. As you can see, gentlemen, the standard settings are not detecting any unusual contacts. He then switched to the modified configuration. Almost immediately, a distinct return appeared on the screen. Contact bearing 47, range 4, 200 yards, moving at approximately 5 knots, Jackson reported. Based on the signature characteristics, this matches our test vessel. Admiral Hayes turned to a lieutenant standing by the door. Confirm the position of our test vessel. The lieutenant spoke briefly into a radio, then replied, The target is at bearing 045, range 480 yards, speed 5 knots, sir. A murmur ran through the assembled officers. The modified radar had detected the target with remarkable accuracy. Impressive, Admiral Hayes acknowledged. But the real question is, can these modifications be implemented quickly across the fleet? Chief Dietz stepped forward. Yes, sir. We've developed a standardized upgrade kit that can be installed by ship's technicians in under 3 hours. The components are readily available, and we've prepared detailed installation and calibration procedures. And the cost? Asked another admiral. Approximately $1,200 per unit, sir, Wells replied. A minimal investment compared to the value of the ships and cargo these systems will help protect. Admiral Hayes looked around the room. Gentlemen, I believe we've seen enough. I'm authorizing immediate implementation of these modifications across all Atlantic escort vessels, beginning with those assigned to convoy duty. He turned to Jackson. Technician Jackson, your team will oversee the initial installations to ensure they're done correctly. I want the first convoy group equipped within 1 week. Yes, sir, Jackson replied, trying to contain his excitement. We'll begin immediately. As the officers filed out, many stopped to congratulate Jackson and examine the modified radar more closely. It was a level of professional respect he had rarely experienced. Commander Blackwell approached with a rare smile. "Well done, Jackson. You've made quite an impression." "Thank you, sir. But the real test will come when these systems face actual U-boats." "That won't be long in coming," Blackwell said grimly. "Convoy ONS-5 departs in 5 days with 43 merchant vessels. Intelligence suggests the Germans are assembling a wolf pack to intercept it. Your modified radar systems will be on the escort vessels." "I'd like to be there, sir," Jackson said impulsively. "On one of the escort ships." Blackwell looked surprised. "That's not necessary, Jackson. Your technical expertise is more valuable here, supervising the rollout." "With respect, sir, I understand this technology better than anyone. If adjustments or repairs are needed during combat conditions, I should be present." The commander studied him for a long moment. "I'll speak with Admiral Hayes. No promises." 3 days later, Jackson found himself aboard the destroyer USS Farragut, one of 7 escort vessels assigned to protect convoy ONS-5 on its dangerous journey across the North Atlantic. Lieutenant Wells had also been assigned to the mission, ensuring Jackson had at least one ally among the ship's company. Captain Lawrence Porter, the Farragut's commanding officer, was initially skeptical about having a civilian technician aboard his vessel during what promised to be a hazardous voyage, but Admiral Hayes's direct orders had overridden his objections. "Mr. Jackson," Porter said during their first meeting in his quarters, "I understand you're responsible for the modifications to our radar systems." "Yes, sir. My team developed the upgrades based on my initial design. And Lieutenant Wells assures me these modifications will help us detect U-boats before they can attack our convoy." "That's the intention, Captain. The system has proven effective in tests and in one actual engagement." Porter leaned back in his chair. "Let me be direct, Mr. Jackson. I don't care about your race, your background, or anything else except your ability to help keep my ship and this convoy safe. If your radar modifications work as advertised, you'll have my gratitude. If they don't, or if they compromise our existing systems, you'll answer to me personally. Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear, Captain," Jackson replied evenly. "I stand by my work." "Good. You'll be assigned to the radar room for the duration of the voyage. Lieutenant Wells will be your liaison with the bridge. If you detect anything unusual, anything at all, I want to know immediately." "Yes, sir." As Jackson left the captain's quarters, Wells was waiting outside. "How did it go?" "About as expected," Jackson shrugged. "He's skeptical but practical. He'll judge the technology on its merits." "That's all we can ask for," Wells replied. "Come on, I'll show you to your quarters. We set sail at 600 tomorrow." The next morning, convoy ONS-5 departed Halifax, Nova Scotia, bound for Liverpool, England. 43 merchant vessels formed a rough rectangle, with the escort vessels positioned around the perimeter. The Farragut took the lead position, its radar scanning constantly for signs of danger. For the first 3 days, the convoy proceeded without incident. The weather was unusually calm for the North Atlantic in early May, with good visibility and moderate seas. Jackson spent most of his time in the radar room, monitoring the performance of his modified system and making minor adjustments to optimize its sensitivity. On the 4th day, the weather began to deteriorate. Dark clouds rolled in from the northwest, bringing rain and increasingly rough seas. By evening, the convoy was fighting through 15-foot waves with winds gusting to 40 knots. In the radar room, Jackson and the regular operators struggled to maintain effective surveillance as the ship pitched and rolled. The storm was generating significant sea clutter on the radar display, creating a challenging detection environment. "Perfect conditions for a U-boat attack," Wells commented grimly as he joined Jackson during the midnight watch. "They can approach on the surface with minimal risk of visual detection, and the storm noise masks their acoustic signature from sonar." "That's exactly why we modified the radar," Jackson replied, adjusting the filters to compensate for the heavy sea return. "Even in these conditions, we should be able to detect a surfaced submarine at up to 8 Ausazern yards." As if on cue, a distinct return appeared at the edge of the radar display. "Contact bearing 320, range 600 yards, Jackson announced, his heart rate quickening. "Signature consistent with a surfaced submarine." Wells leaned in to study the display. "You're sure it's not just an anomaly from the storm?" Positive. Look at the consistency of the return and the movement vector. That's a U-boat, running on the surface at high speed, probably trying to get ahead of the convoy. Wells grabbed the internal communication handset. Bridge, radar room. We have a possible submarine contact, bearing 320, range 7, 600 yards, moving at approximately 15 knots. Captain Porter's voice came back immediately. Are you certain it's a submarine? These conditions are generating false returns all over the standard radar. This is Jackson, Captain. I'm using the modified system, and the return has all the characteristics of a surfaced U-boat. I stake my reputation on it. There was a brief pause. Acknowledged. We're altering course to investigate, maintain tracking and report any changes. The Farragut's engines surged as the destroyer broke formation from the convoy and turned toward the suspicious contact. In the radar room, Jackson watched as the distance to the target gradually decreased. The contact is altering course, he reported. Now bearing 315, still maintaining speed. They don't appear to have detected our approach. Range? Wells asked. 200 yards and closing. Captain Porter's voice came over the communication system. Radar room, illuminate the target with searchlights when we reach 200 yards. Acknowledged, Captain, Wells replied. Then to Jackson, if you're wrong about this... I'm not wrong, Jackson said with quiet confidence, though his stomach was knotted with tension. The Farragut continued its approach through the stormy darkness, waves crashing over its bow as it cut through the rough sea. At 300 yards, the ship went to battle stations, its 5-inch guns trained toward the still unseen target. Range 100 yards, Jackson reported. Contact is now altering course radically, turning toward us. They've spotted us. Searchlights, Porter ordered. Brilliant beams cut through the rain and darkness, illuminating a scene that confirmed Jackson's assessment. There, caught in the harsh white light, was the conning tower of a Type 7 U-boat, its deck guns already manned and turning toward the Farragut. The destroyer's guns opened fire immediately, sending shells screaming toward the submarine. The U-boat returned fire briefly before beginning an emergency dive. They're submerging, Jackson reported, watching the radar signature diminish. Depth charges? Already on the way, Wells replied, as the distinctive sounds of depth charge launchers echoed through the ship. The Farragut passed directly over the diving submarine's last position, dropping a pattern of depth charges set to detonate at varying depths. Seconds later, the charges began to explode, sending massive shockwaves through the water that the destroyer's crew could feel through the hull. After the last explosion, the bridge ordered sonar to report any sign of the U-boat. For several tense minutes there was nothing. Then, sonar detects breaking up noises and air bubbles rising from approximately 300 feet, Captain, came the report. A cheer went up throughout the ship. They had successfully detected and destroyed a U-boat before it could attack the convoy, precisely the scenario Jackson's radar modifications had been designed to prevent. Captain Porter's voice came over the ship's announcement system. This is the captain. We have confirmed the destruction of one enemy submarine. Well done to all hands and special recognition to our radar team for detecting the target under extremely difficult conditions. Remain at battle stations. Where there's one U-boat, there are likely more. In the radar room, the regular operators looked at Jackson with newfound respect. One of them, a young ensign named Michaels, extended his hand. Nice work, Jackson. You just saved a lot of lives. The night's not over, Jackson replied, shaking the offered hand but immediately returning his attention to the radar display. And I'm picking up another contact bearing 045, range 200 yards. The warning proved prescient. Over the next 36 hours, convoy ONS-5 was attacked by a wolf pack of 15 U-boats, one of the largest coordinated submarine attacks of the war. But thanks to Jackson's modified radar systems, the escort vessels were able to detect the approaching submarines before they could reach attack positions. By the time the convoy reached the relative safety of British coastal waters, the escort group had destroyed 5 U-boats and damaged 3 others, while losing only 2 merchant vessels and 1 corvette. It was an unprecedented victory in the Battle of the Atlantic, and word of the convoy's success quickly spread throughout the Allied Naval Command. Upon their return to the United States, Jackson found himself summoned to Washington, D.C., where Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox was waiting to personally thank him for his contribution to the war effort. "Mr. Jackson," Knox said, shaking his hand firmly, "Admiral Hayes has given me a full report on your radar modifications and their performance during the ONS-5 convoy action. Impressive work." "Thank you, Mr. Secretary. It was a team effort." "Indeed. But it was your insight that made it possible." Knox gestured to a chair. "Please sit. We have matters to discuss." Jackson sat, somewhat nervously. He had never imagined he would be meeting with such a high-ranking government official. "Your radar modifications are being implemented throughout the fleet," Knox continued. "Early reports indicate a 40% increase in U-boat detections. This could be the technological edge we've been looking for in the Atlantic." "I'm glad to hear it, sir. The question now is how to best utilize your talents going forward. Admiral Hayes has recommended establishing a special radar development unit under your direction, focusing on continued improvements to our detection systems." Jackson was stunned. "Me, sir? Directing a development unit? Is there a problem with that?" Knox asked, his expression unreadable. "No, sir, it's just unusual for someone of my background to be placed in such a position." Knox leaned forward. "Mr. Jackson, let me be frank. We are fighting a global war against enemies who would destroy everything we hold dear. In such times, talent and results matter far more than convention or prejudice. Your radar modifications have saved lives and shipping that are crucial to our war effort. That's what I care about." "I understand, sir. Thank you for the opportunity." "Don't thank me yet," Knox said with a slight smile. "You'll be facing technical challenges, bureaucratic obstacles, and yes, probably some resistance based on your race. But you'll have my full support and that of Admiral Hayes. What exactly would this development unit be tasked with, sir?" "Initially, refining your current modifications and training technicians for fleet-wide implementation. Beyond that, developing new radar applications specifically for anti-submarine warfare. The Germans are constantly adapting their tactics and technology. We need to stay one step ahead." "I accept the position, Mr. Secretary. When do I begin?" "Immediately. You'll be assigned laboratory space at the Naval Research Laboratory here in Washington. Lieutenant Wells will continue as your liaison, and you'll have authority to select your own technical team." "Thank you for your confidence, sir. I won't let you down." As Jackson left the meeting, Wells was waiting for him in the antechamber. "How did it go?" "I've been tasked with heading a new radar development unit," Jackson replied, still somewhat dazed by the rapid turn of events. Wells grinned. "Congratulations, though I'm not surprised. After what happened with Convoy ONS-5, your reputation is spreading throughout the Navy." "It feels surreal," Jackson admitted. 6 months ago, I was just a technician, struggling to get anyone to listen to my ideas. Now I'm meeting with the Secretary of the Navy." "That's what happens when your ideas save lives and ships," Wells replied. "But don't get too comfortable. The real work is just beginning." Wells' words proved prophetic. Over the next year, Jackson's radar development unit became the focal point for anti-submarine detection technology in the U.S. Navy. What had begun as a simple modification to existing systems evolved into a comprehensive program of radar advancement that significantly impacted the Battle of the Atlantic. By mid-1944, convoy losses to U-boats had decreased by 78% compared to the previous year. German submariners began referring to the period as Black May and beyond, as their once fearsome wolf packs were increasingly detected and destroyed before they could even approach their targets. But the technical achievements came with personal costs. Despite his official position and the support of senior naval leaders, Jackson faced constant challenges to his authority and expertise. Some officers refused to take direction from a black man, regardless of his technical qualifications. Others attempted to take credit for his innovations or questioned the validity of his findings. Through it all, Jackson maintained his dignity and focus on the mission. He let his results speak for themselves and gradually earned the respect of even his most ardent critics. Lieutenant Wells remained his steadfast ally, using his position as a white officer to run interference against the worst of the prejudice. On a cold January morning in 1945, as the war in Europe was entering its final months, Jackson stood on the deck of the USS Midway, the newest and largest American aircraft carrier, watching as his latest radar system was being installed. The massive AN/SPS-6 represented the culmination of everything he had learned about submarine detection, incorporating not only his original frequency modifications, but also revolutionary new signal processing techniques that could distinguish between different types of vessels based on their radar signatures. Admiral Hayes, now commander of the Atlantic Fleet, joined him at the railing. "Quite a sight, isn't it, Jackson? Hard to believe it all started with your tinkering in that Charleston workshop." "It's been quite a journey, Admiral," Jackson agreed, "though sometimes I wonder if we've been too successful." "How so?" "U-boat sightings have decreased dramatically in recent months. Either they've developed countermeasures to our detection systems or they're running out of submarines," Hayes finished. "Intelligence suggests it's the latter. The German war machine is finally breaking down. They simply can't replace their losses fast enough." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "Then what comes next? After the war, I mean." Hayes looked at him. "For the Navy or for you personally?" "Both, I suppose. The Navy will continue to need your expertise, Jackson. Radar technology isn't going to become less important just because this particular conflict ends. As for you personally..." The Admiral paused. "That's a more complicated question, isn't it?" "Yes, sir, it is. I won't pretend that all the doors that opened for you during wartime will remain open afterward. Our nation has a long way to go in that regard. But I can promise you this: your contributions will not be forgotten, at least not by those of us who understand what you accomplished." Jackson appreciated the Admiral's honesty. "Thank you, sir. Whatever comes next, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have made a difference." "A difference? Jackson, you helped turn the tide in the Atlantic. Thousands of sailors and merchant mariners are alive today because of your work. That's more than a difference. That's a legacy." As predicted, the end of the war brought significant changes for Jackson and his team. The urgent need for innovative radar technology diminished as the immediate threat disappeared. Budget cuts and restructuring led to the eventual disbanding of his Special Development Unit, though many of its innovations had become standard features in naval radar systems worldwide. Jackson himself received the Navy Distinguished Civilian Service Award, the highest honor the Navy could bestow upon a civilian, in recognition of his contributions to the war effort. The ceremony was attended by many of the officers and technicians who had worked with him, including Lieutenant Commander Wells, Chief Dietz, and even Captain Porter of the USS Farragut. After the war, Jackson faced the harsh realities of returning to civilian life as a black man in 1940s America. Despite his accomplishments and expertise, many doors remained closed to him. Several major electronics firms refused to hire him for positions commensurate with his abilities, offering only junior roles that failed to utilize his proven talents. Undeterred, Jackson established his own electronics consulting firm in Chicago, specializing in radar and communications systems. Starting with small government contracts that his naval connections helped secure, the company gradually built a reputation for innovative solutions to complex technical problems. By the mid-1950s, Jackson Electronics had grown into a respected name in the industry, employing over 50 people, many of them fellow black veterans who, like Jackson, had struggled to find opportunities that matched their skills and experience. The company became known not only for its technical excellence, but also for its progressive employment practices, hiring based on ability rather than race or gender, at a time when such policies were far from common. In May 1956, on the 13th anniversary of the Convoy ONS-5 action, a special ceremony was held at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C. The Navy was dedicating its newest radar development facility and had made the unprecedented decision to name it after a living person, a civilian, and a black man at that: the Calvin Jackson Center for Radar Excellence. At the dedication ceremony, Admiral Hayes, now retired but still commanding respect, addressed the assembled dignitaries and naval personnel. 13 years ago, a young radar technician with extraordinary insight and determination changed the course of the Battle of the Atlantic. Working against both technical challenges and societal prejudices, Calvin Jackson created radar systems that saved countless lives and helped secure Allied victory in the European theater. Today we recognize not just his wartime contributions, but his continuing legacy of excellence in radar technology and his example of what can be achieved when talent is valued above prejudice. Jackson, now in his 40s and successful beyond what he could have imagined during those tense days aboard the Farragut, accepted the honor with characteristic humility. The technologies we developed during the war were born of necessity and nurtured by teamwork, he told the audience. No single person can claim full credit for such achievements. I was fortunate to work with officers and technicians who were willing to judge ideas on their merits rather than their source. If there's a lesson to be drawn from our experience, perhaps it's this. Innovation thrives when we remove artificial barriers and recognize that good ideas can come from anywhere and anyone. Among those in attendance was a young naval officer named Samuel Gravely, Jr., who would go on to become the first black admiral in the U.S. Navy. Years later, Gravely would acknowledge that Jackson's example had been an inspiration during his own groundbreaking career. Calvin Jackson showed us what was possible, Gravely said in a 1971 interview. He demonstrated that excellence cannot be denied indefinitely, that talent and determination can overcome even the most entrenched prejudices. He opened doors through which many of us would later walk. Jackson continued to innovate throughout his career, securing numerous patents and contributing to advances in radar, sonar, and early computing technologies. His company expanded into international markets and diversified into consumer electronics, becoming one of the most successful black-owned businesses in American history. But perhaps his most significant legacy was in the lives he touched, the technicians he mentored, the veterans he employed, and the students he supported through scholarship programs at historically black colleges and universities. Jackson understood that his success was meaningful only if it created opportunities for others to follow. In his later years, as racial barriers slowly began to fall across American society, Jackson was often asked about his experiences during the war and the discrimination he had faced. He always acknowledged the challenges, but preferred to focus on the positive changes he had witnessed and the progress yet to be made. The radar systems we developed were designed to see through darkness and storm, to reveal what was hidden beneath the surface, he would say. In much the same way, our society is learning to see past superficial differences to recognize the common humanity and potential that exists in every individual. It's a slow process, with many setbacks and false returns, but the direction is clear. And like those escort vessels in the North Atlantic, we must maintain vigilance and continue moving forward, regardless of the conditions. Calvin Jackson passed away in 1984 at the age of 69, having lived to see his wartime innovations evolve into the sophisticated radar systems that became standard on vessels throughout the world's navies. His funeral was attended by naval officers of all ranks, including several admirals who had once served under his technical guidance. In 1998, a newly commissioned destroyer, the USS Calvin Jackson DDG-85, became the first American naval vessel named after a black civilian. The ship's sophisticated AN/SPY-1D radar system, capable of tracking multiple targets with unprecedented accuracy, was a direct descendant of the modifications Jackson had pioneered in that Charleston workshop in 1943. On the bridge of the USS Calvin Jackson stands a small plaque with a quote attributed to its namesake. Technological innovation is not just about seeing what others cannot see. It's about helping them to see it too. It serves as a reminder of how one man's insight and persistence changed the course of naval warfare and opened doors for generations to follow. The story of Calvin Jackson's radar innovations has become part of naval lore, taught to officer candidates and technical specialists as an example of how critical thinking and determination can overcome both technical challenges and societal barriers. His legacy lives on not just in the technologies he created, but in the principle he embodied, that excellence knows no color line, and that in the pursuit of vital goals, talent must be recognized and utilized wherever it is found. Today, as modern navies rely on increasingly sophisticated detection systems to maintain maritime security around the globe, few may realize that many of the fundamental principles underlying these technologies were developed by a black technician who refused to accept the limitations imposed by either existing technology or societal prejudice. But for those who know the history, the clear, detailed returns on their radar displays stand as a silent tribute to Calvin Jackson's enduring genius. The U-boats that once terrorized the Atlantic shipping lanes have long since disappeared from the world's oceans, consigned to history alongside the racial barriers that Jackson helped to dismantle. Yet the ripples of his innovation continue to spread, touching lives and inspiring achievements in ways that even his modified radar could never have detected. Perhaps that is the true measure of Calvin Jackson's impact, not just the ships saved or the enemy vessels detected, but the minds opened and the possibilities revealed. Like the invisible radio waves that formed the basis of his work, his influence extends far beyond what the eye can see, resonating across time to shape our present and future in profound and lasting ways. In the final analysis, Calvin Jackson's story reminds us that progress often comes from unexpected sources, that excellence can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, and that true innovation requires not just technical brilliance, but also the courage to challenge prevailing assumptions about technology, about capability, and about human potential itself. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.